Hello. The theme today is the interesting timing of the COVID 19 with world events and the Feng Shui perspective on conspiracy theories, because there's certainly a lot of conspiracy theories right now being shared on the internet, right, all over the place. And so let's start with the timing, right? Um, you have heard many times people say, follow the money. When something happens, follow the money and see who's going to be profiting from this, right? And there are some people who have these conspiracy theories that some people have created the virus so that they can later on produce the vaccine or the cure and make a lot of money from it. So that's one of the theories that's circulating about. Another angle that you could look at this from is a political benefit, right? I'm just going to go over some of the most common ones that I have seen out there and that people have shared with me. And so there's this China, right? Because it started in China. So some people are saying that it was a biological weapon that the Chinese were developing that for some reason got out. Other people are saying that it was a biological weapon that had been developed originally in the United States and then exported to China to hurt the Chinese government. And so who benefits, right? The Chinese government benefits in some ways. If you think about it, like the most the hugest problem, the most important problem China had been dealing with for the past year was Hong Kong. And so there were protests in Hong Kong all the time. And these protests were not stopping. No matter what they did, they were just not stopping. They were relentless. And so you have these protests in Hong Kong. And what stopped the protests? The coronavirus. Because you would lose all public support all of a sudden if you are that group that decides to go do demonstrations on the street when everybody's supposed to be quarantined to stop the spread of the virus, right? And so that's one of the things that we're looking at. The Chinese government benefited because this has enabled them to stop the demonstrations, the protests in Hong Kong. Some people say that also because China has a huge problem with an aging population, because for a long time they had the one-child policy. So now there's not enough young people compared to the number of older people that they have. And some people say that was so convenient for the Chinese government that this virus attacks, especially the elderly, that are going to be a drain on their social systems and things like that. Then some people say, well, pharmaceutical companies benefit from this because they are going to produce, they're going to sell, a lot of even just over-the-counter medication, and they're going to start working on the development of a vaccine or even something that will kill the virus. And so these companies are going to profit from that. One thing to keep in mind is that all over the world, there are governments, there are organizations, there are agencies that have agendas. They have plans. There are things they want to do. There are things they want to accomplish. And some of their agendas or their plans may contradict one another, right? And so when something like this happens at a national level, then at a world level, those agencies, those organizations, those governments are going to take full advantage of it. So one of the things that's happening in China is that China has been trying to get rid of paper money for a long time. Now, because I know a lot of people in different countries, and I belong to a group, an international women's group where I live, I get to have a lot of information from news from other countries or direct accounts from people who have traveled to these countries or who have family living in these countries. And I had received this information from somebody who is Chinese, who had recently gone back to visit relatives in China. And so most people in China today, their payments are being made through the phone. So they don't even use debit cards or credit cards anymore. It's all done through the phone. Like we have Apple Pay and Amazon Pay. Now, everything in China, for younger people, everything is done through the phone. And so all money is digital. But the older generations were refusing to do this digital money, and they still wanted to work with paper money. And the Chinese government has been wanting to get rid of that. So now the COVID-19 presents the perfect opportunity for them to do that. So what I was told is that they were actually having people come to these places where they were delivering the paper money that they were stashing at home, and that money was actually being burned, and they were entering the digits in their bank accounts, right? And so something that the Chinese government has wanted to do for a long time, which is getting rid of paper money, now they can take this opportunity to say, hey, now I'm going to get rid of this paper money, right? And so every organization, every agency, every government is going to take advantage. They're going to take political advantage. They're going to take a financial advantage. And so that's going to happen. And just because somebody is prepared to take advantage of a situation, that doesn't mean that they caused it. That's the first thing, right? Now, if you look at all this, a lot of these conspiracy theories that are circulating, then you are going to see that most of their claims can be discounted very easily. For example, um, something that was circulating on Facebook was saying that, isn't it interesting that in China only the Wuhan area has been affected, but the rest of China has not been affected at all? And that's not true, and you can find that out very easily, that other major urban areas of China have been affected very, very badly by the coronavirus, even though they did the lockdowns early compared to when they did them in Wuhan. Other people are saying, doesn't it seem strange that Russia, who is friends with China, doesn't have any cases of coronavirus? And they do have there are a good amount of cases of the coronavirus. So a lot of these things that you're reading can be discounted very easily, others not so easily, right? And so what I want to share with you is something that is called the vibrational levels. So I know most of you who are on my list or who follow my work on social media, that you are very curious and you're very interested and you are into new age things and things like the law of attraction, and that you have watched the movie The Secret, read the books by Abraham Hicks and stuff like that. And so you probably are familiar with the idea of vibrational levels, right? We talk about raising your vibrational level so that you can attract better things to your life. And there's a lot of things that are being recommended, like, for example, that you use affirmations, that you work with your emotions, that you work with visualizations, that you do vision boards. From the Feng Shui perspective, the main thing that we want to do is we want to turn your whole home into a vision board, so that your whole home helps you keep your vibration high, but at a chronic level. So even on days when you are off, on days when you don't do your meditation, when you don't do your affirmations, when you're not watching your emotions, even on those days, your energy is good because your environment has a high vibration. So I have this highly technological prop here to show you. So I'm going to show you. So you're going to see it's a series of emoticons, right? So the yellow is the happy faces. The orange is the bored faces, kind of despondent, caring. The blue is the sad faces. And the purple is the suffering faces. So as you can see in this sophisticated chart, there's levels of vibration. So at the lower levels of vibration, you have less happiness and you have more sadness and more suffering. And as you keep coming up the levels of vibration, there's more happiness and less of the other things. When you get to the higher levels of vibration, you're going to have mostly happiness and only very occasional random sadness or suffering, right? Or even being bored or despondent. And so these are levels of vibration. When you keep yourself in a higher vibrational level, certain things are not going to affect you as they're going to affect the people who are in a lower vibrational level. Now, I want you to ask yourself, how do you feel when you start reading about conspiracy theories? When you get into this thing, does your vibration go up or does it go down? In my experience, it always, always, always goes down, because these conspiracy theories, they trigger fear, they trigger uncertainty, doubt, and they're not very hopeful, right? And so whenever you get connected to something, it's going to affect how you think and how you feel. And that can raise your vibration or lower your vibration. So it's not a good idea for you to dwell too much into conspiracy theories or for too long, but because it's going to lower your vibration. Now, if you want to read things because you want to be informed and you want to think, what if, if you just want to have that curiosity, And that freedom, that freedom of thought and freedom of expression of saying, hey, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. That's fine as long as you don't do it for long periods of time. Because if you do it for long periods of time, you are going to lower your vibration. If you are visiting conspiracy theories, if you're reading too much about that, your vibration is going to lower and go lower and lower and lower. So you should never stay too long in connection with that kind of information. Now, just because somebody said the other day, just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean nobody's watching you, right? And so other people say, just because it's a conspiracy theory, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen or that it's not true. And in fact, we know now because of Freedom of Information Acts and things, we know about horrible things that different governments have done in previous generations. And so it's not crazy to think that somebody could be doing something like that today. If you want to get spooked, you can search for human experiments in the United States. And this is all information that has been confirmed. And so horrible things happen in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. It's not crazy to think that something horrible might be happening right now. But you have to be careful where you keep yourself, because in the world at all times, all sorts of things are happening, but they're not happening at the same vibrational level. So if you keep yourself at a high vibrational level, it's going to be a lot less likely that you are going to experience sadness or suffering. But if you let your vibration drop and you stay in a chronic lower vibrational level, then it's going to be more likely that bad things could happen around you. So in Feng Shui, we see luck not as chance, but as what happens in your life as a consequence of the strength of your energy field, your aura. So when your aura is strong and has a good vibration, then you're going to be in a level, in a floor, think of these as floors, right? Where good things are going to happen because you're living in a reality where it's a lot more likely than that good things happen instead of bad things happen. And so we don't see luck as chance, we see it as a consequence of the strength of your energy field. And the strength of your energy field is greatly influenced by your environment, and that's Feng Shui. And so think about it as being in a certain level of vibration like floors. But in reality, it seems like everything is happening in the same vibrational level when it's not. And so I'm going to show you in my sophisticated prop, right? This is the reality of the vibrational levels. But in life, we see it like this. And so it all seems, we look at a city, we look at a town, we look at a country, and it seems to all be together. Now, imagine if instead of this being paper, it was like a transparency, if it was transparent, and I collapse this, and it would all seem to be at the same level. It would seem that it's all here. There's happiness, and there's sadness, and there's suffering, and it all could happen to anybody at any given time. And so, but that is not the reality. The reality is that you are choosing, by the way you keep your chronic vibration, you are choosing to live in one of these floors of vibration. And so we think it's like this. We think that everything is happening in the same reality, but they're actually separate realities. Okay? So you should not get too involved with conspiracy theories because of that. But let's explore the idea that it was true. So think about the worst conspiracy theory that you have heard about. There's this guy from the United Kingdom. His name is David Icke. And he is like the king, the prince of conspiracy theories. And so recently he did an interview, and he is convinced that it's not a virus. The virus doesn't exist. It's a hoax. And it's actually the 5G networks that are causing people to get sick. And he has all these ideas, right? And so think about the craziest conspiracy theory that you have heard about and assume for a moment that is true, right? If it is true that there is a secret government that manipulates all of the governments and all the corporations in the world because they have an agenda, and this agenda is to enslave people and to put chips into people so that they can be controlled from a distance. And David Icke believes, that people are going to be chipped, and eventually artificial intelligence is going to even control their thoughts. So they're going to think the thoughts are theirs, but they're actually going to be thoughts bombarded from satellites into their mind. And so if it was true that this kind of negative evil force was at work in the world, that force could not live here. That force would only have an action here, but would not have an action in the higher levels of vibration, because that kind of negative energy cannot exist in the higher levels of vibration. It could only exist in the lower levels of vibration. And by you engaging, like if you decide to become like a crusader, it's like, I'm going to go against the 5G, I'm going to go bomb the 5G antennas or whatever. Then if you engage in that kind of a violent act, then you're going to become part of this. You're going to lower your vibration, so that then you start living in an existence where that can affect you. So there's a lot of things happening in the world right now, and there's mostly good things happening in the world. Most studies have determined that over 80% of people are actually good. They're trying to do good. They're trying to be decent. They're trying to have happy, productive lives. And there's a 20% of people that don't agree with that. And there's a very small percentage of people, less than 5% of people, who are really the sociopaths, right? And so you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you lower your vibration so that you are coexisting in a vibrational level where that is more likely to happen, right? So you don't want to do that. And you need to keep your vibration high so that events in the world that are horrible don't touch you. So one of my favorite maxims is Martin Luther King said, even if the world was falling to pieces, if I knew the world was going to end tomorrow or something like that, I would still plant my apple tree. And that's one of the maxims I live by, because I grew up during the Cold War. And so we grew up with the fear that there was going to be this nuclear holocaust and everything was going to end, and people were doing drills in schools for when the bombs hit. You have to be very careful that you do not turn your life into something somber, that you do not give yourself a target of the world is going to end, So people have like self-correcting mechanisms. You need to give yourself positive goals, positive outcomes, instead of giving yourself negative outcomes or negative goals. And so, for example, in shamanism, they talk about there's a number of futures, like where you are right now, the future kind of fans out, and there's all these possible futures. And so the shamans look at all the possible futures, and then they choose the future that's going to take them where they want to get. And so then they look at the first next steps in that path, and they take those steps. And so you have to be careful that in your life you're choosing a good future instead of aligning yourself with the possibility of a bad future where people are going to be turned into automatons who don't have their own thoughts, right? And so you need to keep your vibration high. My one maxim is, even if I knew the world was going to end tomorrow, I would still plant my apple tree, because I knew a lot of people growing up that they didn't feel like it was worth doing anything because the world is going to end anyway, right? In a nuclear holocaust. So that's one of the maxims I live by. And another maxim I live by is be in the world, but not of the world. So in Feng Shui, we believe that before you came into this lifetime, in heaven, you made a contract. That's called your contract or pact with heaven. And that contract is made up of the things that you wanted to do, the things that you wanted to experience, the things you wanted to learn, and the things that were required of you, the things that you were asked to do for others. And so when you came to this existence, to this reality, to this lifetime, you came with life missions. And think about this idea, if you went, say for example, that you had joined the Peace Corps and that you were going to a third world country in Western Africa, and that you were sent to a village to build a well, because the village doesn't have water, and so they have to walk to the river and sometimes there's a drought and there's not enough water. So it would be a great advancement for that village to actually have a well in the village that they could just collect water from the well. And say that you have an expertise in doing that. So you go with a team and you go to this village in Western Africa, and your objective there is to build a well. In ideal circumstances, you would go there, build a well, come back home, because that's your mission and you're clear on what your mission is. So once you get to the village in the Congo, you can't get distracted by whatever the political situation is there, by aspects of the religion that you may not agree with. You are not going there to save the country. You are not there to change their religion. You are not there to change their political system. You are there to build a well. So in the same sense, in Feng Shui, we say, do your work, do today's work. Do those things that only you can do, that only you have the ability and the gifts to do. And only do today's work. Don't try to do the work for the whole month or the whole year in one day or in 1 week. And so you just do what you came to do. And that is being in the world, but not of the world. And so if you were going in this mission to a village in West Africa, you would know that your mission there is to go build a well. That doesn't mean that you can't meet people, that you can't make friends, that you can't help a person or another. But you know what your mission is, and you know that you're visiting. You know that's not your home, unless you live in West Africa right now, right? And so it's important to know that you're in the world, but not of the world. And here's the story that I wanted to share with you. This is the story about when I studied architecture, right? And so when I studied architecture, I'm going to use these panels in my screen, right? There were 3 ways to get a degree in architecture. And at the time, architecture was only available in the public university. It was not available in any of the private universities. So if you wanted to be an architect, you had to go to the public university. In the public university, you think of this panel, had the regular classes to become an architect that was referred to as the normal school of architecture. Then to this side, there was a workshop. You would still get the same degree as an architect, but this workshop had been founded by the Communist Party. And the people in this workshop were spending more time doing politics than actually learning to be architects. And when they graduated, they were mediocre architects who were unable to get jobs. This other panel, the one with all the flowers, was where all the creative people were. And so the best teachers, the ones that had traveled the most, that had studied the most, that were more curious, more inquisitive, and that were trying to do experimental ways of teaching architecture. So when I started here, the normal course, right? And something happened when I was halfway through my career that I decided to switch. And I switched to this other panel, which was called the integrative workshop. The integrative workshop was where all the free thinkers were, right? So I moved to the workshop, and I was there for a year. And then the next year, I heard that registrations for the workshops were low. And every year, the normal faculty, they were trying to get rid of the workshops on both sides. And so the enrollments were down. So I decided to make a poster to invite people to join the workshop, the integrative workshop. And I thought it was a brilliant product of marketing, because I was talking about, if you are really creative, if you think different, if you want to explore different ways of doing architecture, come here to the integrative workshop. And so then I had a conversation with one of my teachers, Guido Diaz is his name, and Guido said, "Hey, Moni, we don't want to call attention to ourselves, because every year the normal faculty is trying to close us down. So we don't want any attention. We don't want to say we're different. We don't want us to say we're experimenting on things. We don't want to say that we may be doing things better. We want to go under the radar, because that gives us the freedom to do what we need to do." And I've had very mixed feelings about this, because on the one hand, I understood, right? The less attention we call onto yourselves, the more freedom and less oversight we're going to have to learn architecture in the way we want to learn architecture. But at the same time, I thought that's just like so selfish, because we're saying this is just for us, and the rest of the world, we don't care what happens with that. And so, well, years went by. He was Guido Diaz was my teacher, and then he was my thesis director. So I graduated. I moved to the United States. And a few years later, somebody that was also going to study in architecture, he was a little bit younger than me, he gave me a phone call and he told me the workshops had been obliterated. They had been shut down. And the normal part of the School of Architecture was being completely restructured, and they got rid of the workshops. And all of our teachers in the integrative workshop had left and were now teaching at the new Faculty of Architecture in one of the private universities. And so I called my teacher, Guido, and I said, I'm so sad. I'm so sorry this has happened. And he said, why would you be? And I said, well, because the integrative workshop has closed, and now you all my favorite teachers are going to this other university. And he said, this is what happened. We managed to get the whole School of Architecture restructured. So now the whole School of Architecture is following the methods of the integrative workshop. And he also told me, and they think the faculty, the ones that wanted to close us every year, they think it was their idea. So, and I said, well, that seems unfair because you work for this and you're not getting the credit, and now you are out. And he said, it's okay to be out because we did our job. We already did what we needed to do there. Now there's the new university, and we want to do new and different things over there. And so that was such an important life lesson for me, because I was able to see how working under the radar, just by following their heart and following their life mission, they were able to make a change for the whole School of Architecture. And I think that is our mission to do here. If it was true that there are these really dark forces, right, in the lower levels of vibration, these really dark forces, these secret governments, if all that was true, the last thing you want is to call attention to yourself so you get put on a list, so you get put on a list where things become harder for you. What you want is to keep working over here and accept only the level of fame that is consistent with your life mission. So in the Feng Shui, we have a life area that is called fame, reputation, and social life. And somebody was asking me yesterday, what's the difference between reputation and fame? Because she was saying, I have a great reputation in my business, but I have problems with fame. I don't want to be famous. So here's what it is. Your reputation is what people think and say about you, right? And your fame is your reach. So the reputation is what they say about you. Your fame is how many people say that about you. And so for some people, the work that you came to do, you may not need to have a lot of reach. You may be meant to work with small groups of people at a time. And depending on what you're doing and what your life missions are, you may be meant to work with 12 people at a time, or with 100 people at a time, or with thousands of people at a time, or with hundreds of thousands of people at a time, or millions, billions of people at a time. But the reach of your fame, that is determined by your life mission. So that's an important thing to remember. And sometimes, if you don't want to force that, you don't want to become too famous so that you start attracting negative attention, unless being famous, having that kind of reach, is part of your life mission. So to summarize, right? Conspiracy theories can be fun if you think about them as a script for a science fiction movie or as a novel. That doesn't mean, second thing, that doesn't mean that some of that may not be true. It's quite possible that that could be true. However, number 3, you cannot get connected to conspiracy theories for too long, too intensely, too deeply, because that will lower your vibration. Number 4, if it was true that there were these dark forces at work, the way to avoid them is by keeping your vibration high. Number 5, if you keep your vibration high and you keep working to do the work that you came to do, which hopefully includes raising the vibration of the planet, it is less likely that any dark endeavors could be successful. And you don't have to call attention, number 6, you don't have to call attention to yourself. You don't have to be very public to do what you came to do. And number 7, you need to accept the fame, the reach that comes with your life mission. in the 9 steps to Feng Shui, we don't just look at what happens, but we look at the timing. So the timing is very interesting right now because we are in an election year. The timing of the coronavirus means that politicians cannot continue to campaign as they were used to. They cannot have rallies. People who work for campaigns, they can't go knocking door to door to try and get people to vote or to try and get people to register to vote. So a lot of things are changing. And part of this time, and I think one of the most interesting things that I have read lately is that it may be related to what we have been doing to the world, because the way we have been living as human civilization is not sustainable. There's a lot of trash going around. We've been trashing the planet as a civilization. And so I was surprised to hear this because I had heard people who are environmentalists and that in that line of thinking say it. But I read today that even the Pope said that maybe this is a reaction of the planet. The planet is sick of getting polluted. So maybe it's a reaction of the planet to make us come to a halt, come to a stop. So in a future video, I want to talk about what halting means in Feng Shui, because there's 9 life areas in Feng Shui, and a whole life area is devoted to this halting, to this pause, to this stopping activity, so that you can rejuvenate and continue, and sometimes change direction for the future. And so the timing is very, very interesting, because you see that in Feng Shui we talk about the Tao, right? And the Tao, which is the power that created everything that is, has currents and it has times. In Feng Shui we say wind and water. So we talk also about universal winds and universal waters that carry things in a particular way. And so we're seeing how the timing is determining the destiny of certain political campaigns, the destiny of where certain countries are headed in one way or another. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to see the statistics, because there's so many leaders in so many countries are having different approaches on how to confront the coronavirus. And we're going to see the statistics later on of who did better, taking what measures, and we'll know better what to do. Humanity has never been more prepared to deal with a medical emergency, with a pandemic. We have never had better advances in technology and medicine. And it's also important to remember that in all the history of humanity, epidemics, pandemics have always been controlled with quarantines. Even massive vaccination was only effective when accompanied with quarantine. And so that's another thing that's important to remember, because there's a lot of people who are seeing the quarantine itself as a way that we're being suppressed by governments. It's a necessary thing we need to do right now. Another thing that I have heard people say is that this virus is more dangerous because it is created in a lab. It's not something that mutated on itself. And I heard an expert talk about it, and he said it doesn't make a difference whether the virus was created in a lab or where it mutated on itself. It's still a virus. It doesn't make any difference in how our bodies would respond to it, or any difference in how as a society we would respond to contain the effects of the virus. Sometimes you spend so much time and energy trying to make a decision, and then something happens that shows you the decision was not necessary. Something else was going to decide for you. Like you may have been planning a trip in April or May, and you were agonizing over whether this traveling destination was right or the other traveling destination was right, and then that decision was not made by you. So sometimes we think that we can make all the decisions, and it's not like that, because the currents are moving in different ways. Another thing to remember, going back to the different vibrational levels, is that underlying all of this, the universal winds and the universal waters are following a path that is going to override the particular agendas that governments, organizations, and agencies may have. There's this force. We believe the universe is benevolent, and that the universe loves life, and that life has a purpose. And so, though there may be dark forces working in the world, the currents of the Tao are more powerful than those forces.